The town of Chaman in the province of Balochistan has been a major point of entry for Afghans into Pakistan. But besides refugees, it has also been used in the past by Afghan Taliban members to enter Pakistan. Correspondent Shazib Jilani travelled to the town of Quetta, not too far from Chaman, to bring us this report on how Pakistan has provided safe harbour for the militant group.
The garrison city of Quetta in Balochistan. Western citizens are not allowed here unless they have permission from the central government in Islamabad. This bustling street is known as Kandhari Bazaar, named after the influential city in Afghanistan. The two cities have historical trade and cultural ties. Ethnic Pashtuns move seamlessly between the two cities. They share a common Pashto language and a conservative version of Islam. The city has seen a lot of violence. Police and soldiers stand guard at mosques to prevent further attacks. Okay, so we've just been to the Friday prayers in Quetta, located on Kandhari Bazaar Road. The mosque was jam-packed as expected. The cleric who gave the Friday sermon celebrated America's defeat in Afghanistan, and he also called people to be generous and give donations for helping Taliban in Afghanistan. A short drive north of Quetta, Afghan Taliban flags have gone up over shops and homes. We saw graveyards of Taliban soldiers who died fighting NATO troops in Afghanistan. For much of the last 2 decades, Pakistan denied sheltering the Afghan militants, but now it is open and widely accepted. In 2019, it helped pave the way for the Taliban to be brought to the negotiating table with the US. Last month, that allowed the return of the Taliban in Kabul. But opposition politicians warn that Pakistan will have to pay a price for its involvement in Afghanistan.
We are worried about the backlash, which could be disastrous. If the Taliban fail to establish peace, there will be refugee influx, cross-border smuggling of drugs and weapons.
Experts like Rafiullah Kakar also fear that the chaos next door could boost extremism and erode democratic rights in Pakistan.
My primary concern is that a Taliban-controlled Afghanistan will embolden Islamic militancy in Pakistan. And within Pakistan, the areas that are located along Pakistan's border with Afghanistan will bear the brunt of this blowback of Taliban's ascendancy in Afghanistan.
Pakistani officials say they had to nurture and maintain deep ties with the Afghan Taliban because it served the country's national interest. The country paid a huge price in terms of suicide bombings, mass violence, and a shattered economy. Many people in Quetta and Balochistan are now worried that with the return of Taliban in Afghanistan, the country should prepare itself for tough times ahead.
Let's get some perspective on this from Bushra Gohar, a former member of Pakistan's parliament. Welcome, Mrs. Gohar. Shazib was saying in his report from Quetta that Pakistani officials nurtured ties with the Taliban to serve the national interest. What is this national interest?
Well, this hasn't been really defined or discussed in Pakistan's parliament. And how can investment in terrorism be of national interest? So as far as we were concerned, when we were in parliament, we questioned this suicidal policy. And we had actually also passed a unanimous resolution saying that Pakistan's soil should not be used for sanctuaries for the Taliban. Now, Pakistan has been using, Pakistan has been investing in this policy, the strategic depth policy, and has provided sanctuaries to terrorists and used it as a foreign policy and security leverage. We have always said that this was suicidal and it was affecting Pakistan more, and that all these sanctuaries and safe havens should be cleared. But this is an investment past 20 years and even before. Pakistan's establishment's links with these terrorist groups, and to call them good and bad Taliban, that is also a very,
right.
You know, it's a policy that has brought a lot of harm to Pakistan.
Right. We want to talk about that. And you talked about the policy in terms of a suicidal policy and also the policy of strategic depth. I'd like to pick them up one at a time. What exactly does Pakistan mean by strategic depth?
Well, you see, Pakistan has been working on having a strategic depth in Afghanistan as far as the region is concerned, and used it as, to counter India's interests also, and since 47 the friction that the two countries have. Now, I think that this policy hasn't worked, and it has actually brought a lot of trouble for the region and for Pakistan, and especially for the Pashtuns in the tribal areas.
Right, and that brings me to the word suicidal. Why would you say this policy has been suicidal for Pakistan?
Well, look where we are right now. I mean, our homes have been destroyed. The threats to the country, the existential threats to the country. So it is suicidal. It has brought more harm to the country rather than, and it is also, I mean, for the whole region. It's a policy that has really not benefited the country. How can investing in terrorists really benefit a country? So personally, I feel that we need to address the problems in the region with our neighbors without really working through proxies. And these proxies are really, I mean, there's no good, bad Taliban, in my opinion. And we shouldn't this policy because, I mean, the entire Pakhtunkhwa has been affected. I was recently in Quetta and I found Taliban freely moving around in the city. This is something that we need to question. I mean, terrorists can move around freely, whereas citizens who are questioning these policies are under great threat.
If I can just ask you, we have about a minute left. What do you think Pakistan's policy will be now, given that the Taliban are running Afghanistan?
Well, in my opinion, Taliban in Afghanistan and Taliban are terrorists, and they're occupying Afghanistan with the support of certain countries and the US. The Doha deal gave these terrorists legitimacy, and I feel that it's going to affect us. It's going to hit us hard. Right now, the strategic depth that Pakistan has been working for, they might have gotten it for a little while, but it's going to hit us back.
We'll leave it there for the time being, but thank you so much for joining us today. Bushra Gohar, former member of Pakistan's parliament. Thank you so much, ma'am.
Let's bring in DW's Amrita Chima, our bureau chief in Delhi. Amrita, what's the view there in India of the recent developments in Afghanistan?
Well, Gerhard, certainly none of the euphoria that you saw in parts of Pakistan. Quite to the contrary, there was huge alarm because the Indian government had very good relations with successive Afghan governments over the past 20 years, and it also invested a huge amount in Afghanistan in building infrastructure and also in a hugely symbolic gesture, building the new parliament in the country. And now the Taliban have announced their cabinet, and 17 out of the 33 people in the cabinet are people who are designated as terrorists by the UN, and many of them are linked to groups that India feels were responsible for targeting Indian facilities. For example, the consulates in Afghanistan, which were bombed by some of these groups. So India is not at all happy about the situation there, and it's also very worried that the interior minister, for example, is linked to a deadly group operating in Pakistan, the so-called Haqqani group. So they are worried at multiple levels.
So what are India's other concerns then?
Gerhard, apart from the fact that the people of Pakistan, the people of Afghanistan, they are worried about that all the gains made in the past 20 years, for minority rights, women's rights, and democratic institutions will be rolled back. They're worried about security because you have multiple factions operating in Afghanistan at the moment. And this is fertile ground for terrorist organizations like the Al-Qaeda, like the Islamic State to flourish. And this will have a destabilizing influence, not just in Afghanistan, but neighboring countries like Pakistan, the neighbors of Afghanistan in Central Asia. And India is particularly worried that there will be a spillover into its northern territory of Kashmir, where it's been fighting a separatist militant movement for decades.
I mean, as a substantial regional power, what are India's options there?
Fairly limited, to be honest, at the moment, Gerhard, because at the moment, Pakistan seems to be calling all the shots in Afghanistan. And in fact, some people here feel that it's a proxy Pakistani government that you have in Afghanistan. But India is weighing its options. It has lost a lot of diplomatic leverage, but it's working with international organizations. There have been several high-level visits in India from, for example, intelligence chiefs from the US and Russia. And India is still very keen that humanitarian aid should go into Afghanistan, even if they do not recognize the Taliban. So Prime Minister Modi is going to the United States next week. He'll be having a bilateral chat with President Joe Biden there, and Afghanistan and how to deal with Afghanistan will definitely be top of the agenda.
DW's Amrita Chima there in Delhi. Thank you, Amrita.